Over the past few years, the world has watched with bated breath as a variety of drones have reshaped the way warfare plays out in Ukraine and elsewhere around the globe. But last December, the United States was given a forceful reminder that this threat is not relegated to far-flung battlefields a half a world away. It's already right here on US soil, and America seems to be struggling to overcome a combination of bureaucracy and technological limitations in time to address it. For more than 2 straight weeks last December, swarms of drones of varying sizes, flying at varying altitudes in well-orchestrated formations, violated the strictly controlled airspace over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, sitting directly across the Chesapeake Bay from Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base on the planet. These drones, some with wingspans of over 20 feet, would arrive about an hour after sunset, cruising at around 100 miles per hour just a few hundred feet off the ground. They'd zoom over the hangars that house America's F-22 Raptors, then out over the bay toward the headquarters for SEAL Team 6, and past the most dense collection of national security facilities on American soil, prompting many to ask whose drones were these, why were they there, and maybe most notably of all, why didn't we shoot them down? Let's dive in and see if we can't figure it out. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. If you like military tech, then you'll love War Thunder. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and you can play it right now for free on your PC, your video game console, or your smart device. This game lets you take command of over 2,500 different airplanes, helicopters, tanks, and warships. You can take control of everything from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. And if you like my videos, you'll love War Thunder's Damage X-ray view that shows you exactly what happens when your vehicle or an enemy's gets destroyed. In X-ray view, you can see exactly where a shell penetrated, what internal components were affected, and what ultimately led to the destruction of the vehicle. It's wild stuff. And it really helps to immerse you in the intense combat that is War Thunder, where incredibly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and even authentic sound effects really make you feel like you are at the helm of the most powerful war machines of our time. Join a worldwide community of more than 70 million players taking part in epic PvP battles as we speak, and delve into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. With an unmatched wealth of high-quality content to discover, there is really no better game for fans of military technology. And not only can you play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and even iOS and Android devices, but if you're a new PC or console gamer, or you just haven't logged in 6 months, I can get you a massive bonus pack by following the link for PC or console gamers in the description below. Remember, there will be a separate link for mobile players. This bonus pack includes multiple premium vehicles and the exclusive Eagle of Valor vehicle decorator, not to mention 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of a premium account. But this bonus pack is only available for a limited time, so again, make sure to follow that link in the description below so that you can get in on the War Thunder action. Despite wave after wave of large, seemingly non-commercial drones penetrating the protected airspace over Langley Air Force Base all throughout December of 2023, the first official acknowledgement of these incursions didn't reach the public until March of this year, when the commander of NORAD and NORTHCOM, U.S. Air Force General Gregory Guillotte, publicly testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. NORAD, or the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is a joint U.S.-Canadian command responsible for monitoring and defending the airspace above North America, while U.S. NORTHCOM, or Northern Command, is tasked with defending the American homeland. I'll quote the general now. As part of my 90-day assessment, to tell the truth, the counter-UAS, or uncrewed aircraft systems mission, has dominated that so far in the first month. Of course, I knew it was an issue coming from another combatant command, CENTCOM, where we faced that threat in a very different way because of the environment, but I wasn't prepared for the number of incursions that I see. I've gone into events at Joint Base Langley Eustis, and I'm using that as the centerpiece of my 90-day assessment. Now, as you may have noticed from the wording of that quote, these drone incursions may have been most severe over Langley, but that wasn't the only place they'd occurred. 2 months prior, in October of 2023, 4 drones were detected entering the airspace above the Nevada National Security Site, where experiments relating to things like the disposition of damaged nuclear weapons are conducted. A 5th drone, seemingly not detected by local systems, was also said to be spotted by eyewitnesses on site. Between December 2019 and January 2020, law enforcement officials in Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas were bewildered by waves of large and small drones, flying in carefully coordinated grid pattern formations that seemingly didn't violate any federal laws, but did raise serious security concerns because of the mystery surrounding their origins and operators. This time, I'll quote Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. I think this shows a significant gap in our understanding and national security understanding of the threat drones pose. If we can't find out who they are, how they're being controlled, who's controlling them, what's to keep a nation like Iran or North Korea from looking at this instance and saying, boy, now we should come out and do the same thing with cameras and sensor equipment to find out the kinds of things that would help with international security. So, I think it's a concern. A few months prior to that, in September of 2019, drones also violated the airspace over the Palo Verde nuclear generating station, seemingly focused on the area around one of the plant's pressurized water reactors. Between 5 and 6 drones were reported in the power plant's restricted airspace 2 nights in a row, and then they ended as mysteriously as they began. But the incursions over Langley last December, according to former NORAD and NORTHCOM commander General Glenn Van Herk, were unlike any previously reported. According to U.S. officials who spoke with the Wall Street Journal, the military doesn't believe the drones flown over Langley last December were owned or operated by hobbyists. The drones themselves, some spanning an estimated 20 feet or bigger, were too large, and the formations they flew in were deemed to be too complex. These larger fixed-wing drones, witnesses report, would fly as low as just 100 feet off the ground, while smaller quadcopters, said to be about the size of a standard 20-pound commercial drone, would accompany them flying a few dozen feet below. However, officials quickly determined that these drones were not operating on the same frequency bands that are available for commercial drones of these types. Now, it's worthy of note that this sort of large mothership drone being orbited by smaller quadcopters was also reported in those 2019 and 2020 sightings over Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas. Now, these drones would approach Langley from the north, usually within 45 minutes to an hour after sunset. They'd fly over the base and then south across the Chesapeake Bay toward Naval Station Norfolk. The drone swarms would then loop around and repeat the pattern again, usually until around midnight when they'd disappear back into the darkness. According to reports, the air defense radar arrays in the area didn't even always pick up those smaller quadcopter drones. But importantly, that's not due to a lack of technological capability. These radar arrays are extremely sensitive, and as such, are set with gates, or filters, if you will, meant to sift out things that wouldn't potentially be a threat and don't necessarily warrant your attention. So with those filters set to weed out things that are small and slow enough to be a bird, it often filtered out those smaller quadcopter returns. And as a result, they needed to just adjust those filters or gates in order to better track these potential threats in the future. After the first few days of repeated incursions, the base command chose to postpone all nighttime training over concerns that their aircraft could collide with these incoming drones. F-22s were relocated elsewhere, and military and law enforcement personnel started combing the area for anyone close enough to be controlling them. When one ship was spotted floating in international waters just off the coast, the U.S. Coast Guard closed in and boarded the vessel, hoping to catch the drone operators red-handed, but instead found nothing linking the ship to the drones at all. And then, on December 23rd, 17 days after the first drone swarm arrived in Langley, the mysterious aircraft departed for the last time and never returned. Now, none of these drones ever demonstrated any overtly threatening behavior, and as we'll learn in a few minutes, that's a very important legal distinction to draw. But more broadly speaking, the mere presence of these drones could nonetheless be interpreted as a threat to American national security. Not only could these drones be collecting valuable intelligence that could be transmitted to adversary forces, but they could also be identifying potential vulnerabilities, helping to establish tactics, and maturing operational concepts toward large-scale drone attacks to be mounted against American defenses and critical infrastructure if a large-scale fight ever were to break out. Which all further presses the importance of the question, why aren't we shooting these drones down? And as is often the case when it comes to conversations about why the US military isn't doing something that we know they're capable of doing, the answer is that US law prioritizes the defense of critical American freedoms over the protection of critical defense assets. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You see, despite the hyperbolic headlines about America's defenses failing to stop these drone incursions, what really stopped the US military from firing up its air defenses and playing duck hunt with these slow-moving targets is a long-standing federal statute passed all the way back in 1878, known to most of us as the Posse Comitatus Act. And while you might not be familiar with that name, you're almost certainly familiar with the law. This is the law that bars the use of the US military to enforce civil laws inside the United States unless expressly authorized by Congress, a law that's seen as vital to preserving civil liberties and separating military and civilian authority within the American government. In other words, this is the law that bars the use of the American military against the American people. Military installations like Langley Air Force Base here in the US are authorized to defend themselves only when someone or something, like inbound drones, pose an imminent threat. So, had these drones been armed with explosives, for instance, well, then the Air Force would have been well within its legal right to open up on them like the 4th of July. But because all these drones were doing was flying by overhead, they did not meet the criteria, legally speaking, for a self-defense engagement, even if they were likely to be collecting sensitive intelligence data. Now, this is a facet of the legal implications of drone defense that's almost certain to see a great deal of discussion in the years ahead because of events like this. But in the meantime, despite the military being best equipped to address these threats, the job of handling them is legally mandated to fall instead to federal and local law enforcement agencies. And truth be told, it's not only about the legal implications of mounting an intercept. There are other concerns here as well. Launching interceptors from a ground-based air defense system or air-to-air missiles from a fighter aircraft over a densely populated area in Virginia could create very real risks for military personnel and, importantly, the civilian population. Not only do you need to worry about debris from the missiles and their targets falling on people's houses, their schools, their shopping centers, but you have to worry about ordnance missing its target entirely, at which point the Air Force would effectively be bombing the suburbs to stop drones that, one could argue, pose no real threat to anyone's physical safety and may not even be operated by an adversary force at all. Now, to be clear, America having the hardware necessary to engage these types of drone threats also doesn't necessarily mean that these systems were physically present at Langley Air Force Base last December. And even if those systems were present, there's also no guarantee that all of these drones could be shot down before any of them could have engaged a target if that was their intent. Air defense is never a certainty, and mounting an effective intercept of a large volume of targets is among the biggest challenges air defenders could face. But it is nonetheless important to understand that an effort to shoot these drones down never happened. If it had, there's a good chance that we'd have way more answers about their origin and their operators by now. Now, as I said, these drones reportedly approached Langley Air Force Base from the north, and we can make some assertions about how far they flew to get there based on the smaller drones witnesses saw, which, again, were reportedly about the size of a standard 20-pound commercial quadcopter. So, by looking to similar platforms available on the commercial market, we can make some general assumptions about the range and endurance these systems were likely to have. Among the more capable and popular 20-pound class quadcopters on the market are systems like the DJI Matrix 350 RTK, which can offer roughly 3.3 hours of operating time on its internal batteries and as much as 6 hours with external batteries affixed to it. These drones have a publicly listed maximum range of better than 10 miles, and according to the manufacturer, control can be transmitted as far out as 12 miles or so. That's roughly 20 kilometers in a low interference and unobstructed environment like the seaside. Other quadcopters touted for their long-range capabilities, like the Autel Robotics Evo Max 4T, claim similar ranges. And some of the longest-ranged military FPV drones of this sort, operated in places like Ukraine, are said to have maximum ranges of around 25 miles, or roughly 40 kilometers. So even assuming these drones may have been more advanced than your standard commercially available systems, we're still talking about a fairly short-ranged asset that requires control elements to be relatively close by. But in reality, there's a solid chance these drones were commercially available assets, even if they were indeed being used for espionage. You see, many real clandestine intelligence operations out there actually do leverage off-the-shelf technology for the simple reason that it comes with built-in plausible deniability. Let me explain what I mean. If you're an American spy in Moscow, for instance, the last thing you want to do is run around that city carrying an agency-issued heart attack gun, or, in this case, a highly classified and supremely capable spy drone, because the minute that gear is found tucked inside your jacket, it becomes impossible to maintain your cover. But if you buy your spy gear off the shelf at Costco, well, then you can claim you're just an enthusiastic amateur who's not great about reading signs and just happened to find yourself in a place you weren't supposed to be. Now, if you're thinking that's not a great cover, you're right. It may not even get you out of trouble, but it does insulate the nation you're spying for from responsibility. And ultimately, that's the real name of the game in these situations. And in fact, as luck would have it, that might even be exactly what happened over Langley Air Force Base last year. On January 6th, 2024, just 2 weeks after the last drones swarmed over Langley, 26-year-old Fengyang Shi, a Chinese foreign student visa holder in the United States to attend courses at the University of Minnesota, parked his rented Tesla just outside a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia, some 1,200 miles from his home in St. Paul. The shipyard belonged to Huntington Ingalls Industries, the firm responsible for the construction of America's new Gerald R. Ford-class supercarriers and for supporting a wide variety of other sensitive and classified Navy programs. According to a Department of Justice affidavit, people who lived nearby noticed Xi flying his drone around the secure facility despite very bad weather, and when the drone ultimately got stuck in a tree on the property of a local resident, well, that resident approached him as he was trying to get it down. That resident, who was not identified in the affidavit, ultimately called the police instead of helping. And when the Newport News police arrived and questioned why Xi was flying his drone in that area, especially in such bad weather, Xi reportedly grew visibly nervous. But with the drone still stuck up in the tree and no actual evidence of a crime being committed, the police just told Xi that if he really wants his drone back, he should call the fire department and they could probably help. But Xi, instead, opted to beeline it right back to his rented Tesla and get out of there. Less than 60 minutes after his interaction with law enforcement, Shi was returning his rental car. He then went on to board an Amtrak train to Washington, D.C., where he bought a plane ticket for the next morning, but not back to St. Paul, Minnesota. He instead flew to Oakland, California, where he went on to purchase a one-way ticket to China. Shi was arrested on January 18th, just before boarding that flight. And it was then that Shi learned that the morning after his interaction with police, his drone had fallen out of the tree all on its own. And that same resident had called the police back, who then turned the drone over to NCIS, or the Naval Criminal Investigative Services, who then subsequently turned it over to the FBI. And that drone, they all soon came to find, was just chock full of photos and videos taken of dry-docked U.S. Navy vessels and other ships under construction at the Newport News Shipbuilding Yard in Newport News, Virginia, and the BAE Systems Shipbuilding Yard in nearby Norfolk, Virginia, the former of which is less than 10 miles from Langley Air Force Base. Shi ultimately pleaded guilty to unlawfully taking photos of a classified installation, though he maintains that he's just really into boats and likes flying drones in the middle of the night. The drone he was using to take these pictures of the classified facility was commercially available. In fact, he'd bought it the day before leaving for Virginia at Costco. Now, to be clear, there is no publicly available evidence that ties Shi and his drone escapades to the rash of drone flights over the same area a few weeks prior, but it doesn't take a great deductive leap to see a potential correlation. But there is one other possibility that, as far as I know, has gone largely undiscussed, but may have mirrored the intelligence collection efforts of Chinese assets like Shi by intentional design. And that possibility is called red teaming. Now, red teaming is not specific to the US military. You can find that phrase all over corporate America as well. But within the defense apparatus, it's a term we often use to describe those tasked with playing the part of adversary forces in war games or military exercises. These groups, some formal, some informal, are tasked with attacking existing plans, assumptions, tactics, procedures, equipment, training, and more, all to identify vulnerabilities in American defenses that are in need of shoring up. In short, red teams are often meant to operate outside the standard purview of domestic military operations and instead function as a surrogate for adversary action. In the Pentagon's 2003 report entitled The Role and Status of DoD Red Teaming Activities, it explained that red teams playing the role of adversary forces are sometimes tasked with emulating the known capabilities and tactics of an opponent. But in other instances, these teams may be given, quote, wider latitudes to discover technological counters to U.S. systems. In other words, red teams aren't always just substitutes for Russia or China, for instance, and at times they can get very creative with the ways they go about circumventing American defenses. Maybe the most infamous of these red teams, and an excellent example of just how creative these endeavors can get, came in the form of Richard Dick Marcinko's chaos-inducing unit known to most of us as Red Cell. A legendary special operator, Marcinko led SEAL Team 2 until he was tasked with establishing a new team that could take on rapidly developing terrorist threats. Marcinko's hand-picked group of elite operators would come to be known as SEAL Team 6, the Navy's most elite special operations group. And upon leaving SEAL Team 6 in 1984, Marcinko was then tasked with standing up another new team. This one made up mostly of former SEALs, with a single Force Recon Marine to boot. This team was officially called Op 06D, but was the infamous Red Cell as we know it. Now, Red Cell was formed at the request of the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at the time, Admiral James Ace Lyons, and it was tasked with testing the Navy's vulnerabilities to terrorist attacks by, well, becoming the terrorists themselves. Marchenko's team reportedly infiltrated bases, stole top-secret documents, kidnapped civilian personnel, and even allegedly planted a fake bomb near Air Force One. In fact, Red Cell was arguably a little too successful, with Marchenko ultimately going to prison, officially over the misappropriation of funds, but Marchenko claimed that it was really due to animosity over how easily he and his team embarrassed command elements. Now, I want to be clear that there is no evidence to suggest that a modern iteration of Red Cell is now repeating history, using off-the-shelf technology to demonstrate just how vulnerable American defenses can be right here at home due to legal concerns over jurisdictional responses and a lack of deployed anti-drone assets. But as a student of American military history, I can say that there is certainly precedent for it. And if that's what the drone swarms over Langley and elsewhere ultimately prove to be, well, I wouldn't be all that surprised by it either. Because the conversations these drone swarm incursions are forcing within elements of the defense apparatus right now needed to happen. The American military and law enforcement agencies need to hash out whose responsibility it is to defend against these sorts of attacks, and we need a plan to trace them back to their source. And while these conversations were happening before, they were hypothetical then, and they definitely aren't anymore. So, while the story of the drone swarms over Langley Air Force Base is still wrought with mystery, if you ask me, the bigger story is what happens from here. How do we make sure that what happened over Langley last December never happens again? And one last shout out to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget that you can play War Thunder for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and both iOS and Android devices. And if you're a new PC or console player, or you just haven't logged on in 6 months, you can get a massive bonus pack by following that link in the description below. That includes premium vehicles, in-game currency, and a whole lot more. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.